The first thing I noticed was how empty a mall feels without people, like a body without a pulse. The second thing I noticed was that the mannequins don't like being left alone. I clocked in at 11:58 p.m., mop bucket squeaking behind me as I pushed it toward the fashion wing. The overhead lights buzzed with a faint electric hum, the kind that makes you feel like you're not supposed to be there. My footsteps echoed too loudly. Every store gate was pulled down, but the glass displays stared back at me, row after row of mannequins frozen mid-pose. Or at least, I thought they were frozen. An hour into my shift, I ducked into the maintenance office to grab fresh rags. On the security monitor, the boutique 2 corridors over looked normal, until I rewound the feed. My stomach tightened. In the first frame, the front mannequin had its hand resting at its hip. In the next, its arm was extended toward the glass, fingers splayed, like it was reaching for something. No one had entered. No one had left. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it was fatigue. When I glanced back at the screen, the mannequin's head was tilted, chin low, as if it was staring at the camera. The air in the room felt heavy. I shut the monitor off. Back in the fashion wing, my mop handle knocked into something solid. I turned and froze. A mannequin stood directly in the middle of the hallway, blocking my path. I knew for a fact that spot had been empty seconds ago. Its glossy eyes caught the fluorescent light in a way that looked almost wet. A cold shiver ran up my spine. I pushed past it, muttering to myself, convincing my brain it had been moved earlier and I just hadn't noticed. But when I reached the end of the corridor and looked back, the mannequin had turned. It was facing me, and its arm was reaching out. The fluorescent lights hummed above me like a swarm of trapped insects, their pale glow flat, eating every shadow into something unnatural. I forced myself to keep walking, the wheels of my mop bucket squealing against the polished tiles. Each squeak seemed too loud, bouncing back from the storefront glass. I told myself not to look back. I failed. The mannequin still stood in the hallway, but now it was turned slightly, its chin lifted as though listening. That was ridiculous. Plastic doesn't listen. Still, I found myself whispering, "Stay put," under my breath like an idiot. The air smelled faintly of dust and old perfume. The fashion wing always held on to scents from the day. Customers trying on clothes, spraying testers. It made the night shift feel like walking through the ghost of a crowd. I kept my eyes on the floor, swiping the mop side to side, letting the motion calm me. Halfway down the next corridor, something tapped on glass. Not a random noise, 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I turned my head, heart pounding. Inside a shoe store, 2 mannequins stood near the window. Their arms were down, but one had its head turned toward me at an impossible angle, chin nearly touching its shoulder. I stepped closer to the glass. The security gate was locked tight. No one could have gotten in. My reflection hovered over theirs, distorted by the thick paint. Behind me, the sound of rolling plastic echoed, like something heavy being dragged. I spun around. The hallway was empty. I started pushing the mop bucket faster now, telling myself I'd finish early tonight. The pay wasn't worth this. At the far end of the corridor, I saw movement. A mannequin stepped from one storefront into another. It didn't fall. It didn't get pushed. It stepped. And I wasn't imagining it. My first instinct was denial. I told myself maybe the step had been a trick of the light, or maybe I was more tired than I thought. But I couldn't ignore the way the figure had vanished into the dark boutique across the hall. That store had been closed for months, under renovation after a pipe burst in the ceiling. The windows were covered from the inside with thick black plastic stapled into place. I'd walked past it dozens of times on my shift. It never felt inviting. Still, my feet carried me forward, as though some part of me needed to prove it was nothing. When I reached the entrance, the security gate was down and padlocked, exactly as it had been for weeks. But the air that drifted from the gaps between the metal slats was colder than the rest of the mall. Not air-conditioned cool, cellar cool, damp, metallic. I crouched, peering between the slats into the dark. The black plastic inside rustled. It could have been from the air vents, or it could have been from something moving just behind it. A faint shape pressed against the plastic from the other side, a smooth, featureless face pushing forward until the material stretched tight over it. I stumbled back, heart hammering. my mop handle clattering to the tiles. When I blinked, the plastic was flat again. The hallway behind me creaked. Not a small sound, a full, heavy shift, like someone had stepped onto the tiles. I turned slowly. The mannequin from the fashion wing stood in the middle of the corridor, closer now. Its arm was raised, hand open. I took a step back toward the locked boutique. The figure didn't move. Then I noticed something I hadn't before. Its glossy, molded smile wasn't fixed anymore. It was wider. I don't remember deciding to move, but suddenly I was backing away, my heels squeaking against the tile. The mannequin stayed still, its painted eyes catching the light like polished marble. It's the smile. It couldn't have changed. That wasn't possible, but I couldn't unsee it. I told myself I'd just turn, walk away, and finish the shift. Pretend I never saw any of it. My mop bucket was still behind me, halfway down the hall. I'd grab it, head to the food court, and avoid the fashion wing altogether. But then the air shifted. The mall is sealed tight at night, so you notice every draft, every fluctuation in temperature. This one came from the mannequin's direction, a faint push of cold air that smelled faintly of dust and something sweet, almost like decayed flowers. I took one step toward the bucket. The mannequin's arm twitched. Not much, just a tiny jerk at the elbow. But it was enough to lock every muscle in my body. I could feel my pulse in my throat, pounding so hard it hurt. "Stop," I whispered. It didn't. The twitch became a slow, deliberate movement. The arm lifted until the hand was pointing directly at me. Its fingers were slightly curled, as if beckoning. I turned and ran. My sneakers slapped against the tiles as I sprinted toward the service corridor. Behind me, the squeal of plastic joints echoed, too fast to be imagined. I didn't look back until I burst into the dimly lit break area, slamming the door behind me. I pressed my back to it, listening, the hum of the vending machine, the distant buzz of the overhead lights. Nothing else. I forced myself to breathe. Maybe the sound had been my mop bucket tipping over. Maybe I'd imagined the movement. Then I glanced at the narrow window in the break room door. The mannequin was there, inches away, its head tilted against the glass. The mannequin didn't move. It just pressed its painted cheek against the glass, lips fixed in that too wide grin. I could see faint scuff marks on the plastic where it touched the window, like it had been dragged across a floor before standing there. My first instinct was to call security, not because I thought they'd believe me. Hell, I barely believed me, but because I wanted another human voice in the building. The guard on duty that night was Davis, a stocky man in his late 50s who'd worked here longer than I'd been alive. He answered on the first ring. "Break room, now," I whispered. "Bring your keys." When he arrived, the hallway outside was empty. The mannequin was gone. "You've got that look," Davis said, narrowing his eyes. "The first night look." I told him what I'd seen, how it moved, how it followed me. I kept my voice low, afraid of how insane it sounded. He didn't laugh. He didn't even look surprised. Instead, he leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Don't stare at them too long," he said. I blinked. "What?" "They don't like it. You keep your eyes on them, they'll keep theirs on you. Turn your back, they get curious." I wanted to ask what the hell that means, but something in his tone told me not to push. Instead, I asked if he could check the security cameras. He shook his head. "Already did. Hall's empty. Always is." We stood in silence for a moment. The air between us felt heavy, charged. Finally, he straightened. "If you want to make it through the night shift in this place, stick to your routes. Don't wander, and when you see one of them, walk away. Don't touch them. Don't talk to them. And for God's sake, don't look away if you're too close." Then he left, the sound of his boots echoing down the hall. I realized I was still clutching my mop handle like a weapon. Somehow, that didn't feel ridiculous anymore. Davis's warning rat. A lead around in my head as I wheeled the mop bucket back toward the fashion wing. His voice had carried the weight of someone who'd seen things he didn't want to talk about. The mall felt different now, like every shadow was watching me. The fashion wing stretched out in front of me, an endless corridor of glass storefronts. Each display was lit just enough to show the frozen figures inside. Male and female mannequins, some dressed in flashy suits, others in sequined dresses. Their glossy skin reflected the dim light, giving them an almost waxy sheen. I forced myself to keep my eyes moving. Davis had said not to stare, and I wasn't about to test the theory. Still, every time my gaze brushed over one of them, I felt a pinprick of awareness, like they were keeping track of my steps. The air here was cooler, and the faint smell of perfume mixed with floor polish created a cloying sweetness that made my stomach turn. Halfway down the hall, I stopped to wring out the mop. When I looked up, one of the mannequins in the boutique ahead seemed closer. It stood just behind the glass yesterday, I was sure of it. Now it was pressed right against the window, one hand flat against the pane. I looked away immediately, my pulse quickening. I mopped faster, the sound of wet fabric swiping over tile filling the empty space. I counted my steps to keep calm, 23, 24. A faint tap echoed from behind me. I didn't turn right away. I knew deep down what I'd see. When I did, a mannequin stood in the middle of the corridor, same one from before. Its head was slightly cocked, like it was curious. I gripped the mop handle, took a breath, and walked toward it. It didn't move, but when I passed, I felt the coldest breath of air at my neck, like something leaning in, close enough to whisper. I pushed forward, refusing to look back again. My heart was beating so loud it drowned out the hum of the lights. The end of the corridor opened into a wide junction where 4 wings of the mall met. My mop bucket rattled across the transition strip in the floor. I told myself to keep working. That's all. Just mop. Don't think. Don't stop. The sound came from behind, a sharp crack like plastic hitting tile. I froze. Slowly, I turned. The mannequin lay sprawled on the floor a few yards away, one leg twisted at an unnatural angle, its painted face staring at me upside down. Its arm was extended toward me, fingers bent like they'd tried to grab something mid-fall. I swallowed hard. Not possible, I whispered. The thing had no joints in its knees. How could it even end up like that? I glanced up at the storefront it must have fallen from. The security gate was down. No way anyone had been inside to push it. Cautiously, I stepped closer. The plastic was scuffed in several places, faint black streaks like shoe marks. I crouched, reaching for its torso. The moment my hand touched it, its head shifted, just a fraction, just enough that the eyes locked directly on mine. I yelped and stumbled back, slamming my shoulder into the gate. The mannequin hadn't moved again, but the memory of that tiny shift burned in my vision. I grabbed it under the arms, trying to haul it upright. The plastic felt wrong, warmer than it should be. My grip slipped, and as I steadied it, its arm swung forward and brushed my wrist. The touch was faint, but I swear I felt the curve of knuckles. When I finally got it back into the window display, I didn't look at its face. I shoved it against the glass, turned, and walked away as fast as I could. Behind me, something scraped lightly against the pane. I needed to know if I was losing my mind. The maintenance office sat in the service corridor B, behind the food court. Inside, the hum of old electronics filled the air, and the faint smell of burnt dust clung to the monitors. The CCTV system was ancient, thick black cables snaking into a wall of small flickering screens, each showing a different corner of the mall. I dropped into the chair and cycled through the feeds until I found the fashion wing. The mannequins stood exactly where they should, frozen in their displays. I rewound the footage by 10 minutes. At first, everything looked normal. The still image of empty hallways, dark storefronts, mannequins in place. Then the screen glitched. Static rolled for half a second. When the picture cleared, 2 mannequins were in the middle of the corridor. I knew damn well they hadn't been there before. I rewound again, slowing the playback. Frame by frame, the hallway sat empty, until a single frame showed both figures suddenly closer. In the next frame, closer still. No walking, no blur of motion, just instant changes in position. I could feel sweat beating on my neck. My hands gripped the controls tighter. The feed glitched again, a burst of harsh white noise spitting from the speakers. For a moment, I thought I saw something else. Thin, human shapes moving behind the mannequins, like shadows wearing their skins. Then the screen went black. The lights in the office flickered. A faint tap echoed from the hallway outside. I turned in my chair. The door was half open. Through the gap, I could just make out a pale shape in the darkness. It was standing too still to be human. I reached forward and slammed the door shut, locking it. My breathing was loud in the tiny room. When I turned back to the monitors, every single feed was frozen, every mannequin in the mall facing the nearest camera. I sat in the CCTV room longer than I should have, staring at the frozen screens. The longer I looked, the more wrong they seemed. The mannequins weren't just facing the cameras. They looked like they were leaning toward them, as if they could see me through the feed. I needed to get out. I unlocked the door, peeked into the corridor. Empty. No pale figure. No movement. Just the low hum of the mall's climate control. The quickest way back to my cart was through the fashion wing. I didn't want to, but the other route would take twice as long, and every second I stayed here felt like an invitation for something to catch me. The boutique with the black plastic walls waited halfway down the corridor. I told myself I wouldn't look, just pass it, keep walking. But when I reached it, I froze. A faint sound was coming from inside. At first I thought it was the ventilation, but the rhythm was wrong, irregular, hushed. It was words. I stepped closer, straining to hear. You shouldn't be here. The voice was breathy, rasping, and unmistakably human. My stomach dropped. I crouched to look through the gap at the bottom of the security gate. Beyond the layer of black plastic, I saw movement, a slow shifting, like someone adjusting their weight from one leg to another. The smell hit me next, damp fabric, dust, something faintly metallic like old coins. The voice came again, closer to the gate this time. Go back. A shadow fell across the gap, feet, bare, pale, and still. I stumbled back so fast I nearly tripped over my own bucket. The mop clattered to the floor. From behind the black plastic, something pressed against it, hands flat and wide, leaving deep impressions before sliding slowly down. I turned and ran, not stopping until I reached the break area again. But even there, I couldn't shake the feeling that the voice hadn't been a warning. It had sounded more like a promise. By the time I left the break area, my hands had stopped shaking, but my legs still felt unsteady. I told myself I'd just finish my shift, clock out, and forget all about it. The mall's main concourse stretched ahead, dark storefronts yawning open behind metal gates. My mop bucket squeaked along beside me, the only sound besides the faint hum of the lights. Then one of those lights flickered, just for a second. And in that second, I heard it. Footsteps. Not the slow echo of my own, but quick, deliberate steps coming from behind. I stopped. The sound stopped. My pulse thudded in my ears. I took another step forward. The lights flickered again. Footsteps followed. 2, maybe 3, perfectly in sync with the dark. I turned fast, but the hallway was empty. The mannequins in the nearby displays stood motionless, their glossy faces blank. One of them had its head tilted slightly, as if watching. I gripped the mop handle like a bat and kept moving. My pace quickened. Flicker. Footsteps. Flicker. Closer. The sound was wrong. It didn't echo like it should. It was flat, sharp, like bare plastic against tile. I passed a sportswear store and froze. Inside, 2 mannequins were pressed against the glass. Their hands splayed, faces turned toward me. Their mouths were open now, tiny seams in the molded plastic where none had been before. The lights flickered again, plunging the hall into shadow for a heartbeat. When they came back, the mannequins were outside the store. I ran. The footsteps behind me were faster now, matching my pace exactly. I didn't look back. Every instinct screamed that if I saw how close they were, I wouldn't be able to move at all. I burst into the service corridor, slamming the door shut and locking it. My chest heaved and the silence pressed heavy around me. Then came the sound I dreaded most. 3 slow knocks on the other side of the door. I didn't open the door. I waited, holding my breath until the knocks stopped. Even then, I stayed put another full minute before moving. I decided to cut across the upper level and take the service elevator to the storage area. Less open space, fewer displays. The elevator sat in a dim corner, its stainless steel doors smudged and fingerprinted. I jabbed the call button. The hum of machinery came faintly from the shaft, followed by the soft whine of cables. When the doors slid open, I froze. There was a mannequin inside. It stood in the corner, facing the back wall. No clothes, no paint, just bare white plastic. Its arms were straight at its sides, fingers grazing the floor. I told myself it was a prank. Someone left it there as a joke. I stepped inside anyway, pressing the button for the lower level. The doors closed with a soft hiss. The elevator shuddered, started moving. Halfway down, the lights flickered. The mannequin was now facing me. Its head was tilted slightly, and in the dim light I could see faint scratches around the mouth seam, like someone had tried to pry it open. I backed into the opposite corner, my hand flat against the wall. The air felt warmer, like body heat radiating from the figure. The elevator jolted suddenly and stopped between floors. The lights went out completely. In the pitch black, I heard a faint creak of plastic bending. I slammed the emergency button, the tiny bulb above it flickering weakly to life. The mannequin was closer now, halfway across the small space. I pounded on the door. "Get me out!" My voice sounded small in the metal box. A grinding noise came from the shaft as the elevator started moving again. The mannequin didn't move this time, but its head was tilted further, almost touching its shoulder. When the doors finally opened, I bolted out, leaving the mop bucket behind. I didn't even care where it stopped. I didn't stop running until I was halfway across the lower concourse. My breathing echoed back at me in the empty space, ragged and too loud. I leaned against a support column, telling myself I'd just clean one last section, then hide out until sunrise. That's when I saw it. On my left was a storefront I didn't recognize, not a new one being set up, not one I'd overlooked. An entire display space that had no business being there. It was wedged between two familiar shops, both with their gates down. This one had no name above it, no security gate, no doors at all, just a wide, glassless opening leading directly into a dimly lit room. The floor was spotless white tile, and in the center stood a perfect circle of mannequins. They weren't in casual poses like the ones in the fashion wing. These were arranged like they were in the middle of a conversation, bodies leaning slightly inward, heads turned toward each other. Their faces had no features, not even the shallow outlines for eyes or a mouth, just smooth ovals of plastic. I stepped closer, trying to see if this was some kind of art installation. The air inside was stale and faintly warm, like it had been trapped for a long time. One of the mannequins faced the opening. Its smooth head was tilted, the body angled just enough to make it feel inviting. I told myself I'd just take one step inside, look around, and leave. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, the lights inside brightened slightly. The circle of mannequins seemed tighter now, the gaps between them smaller. I stepped back instinctively and felt cold plastic against my spine. I spun around. There was nothing behind me. When I looked back inside, the mannequins were all facing me, every single one. I backed away fast, my shoes squeaking on the tile. The lights dimmed again, and the store seemed to recede into shadow, as if it had never been. And there at all. After the store without doors incident, I decided I needed another pass by Davis. If anyone knew what the hell was going on, it was him. I found him near the west entrance, leaning against his cart, sipping from a dented thermos. His eyes flicked to me immediately. "You're pale," he said flatly. "Saw something?" "Something's wrong here," I told him. There's a shop that shouldn't be there. Mannequins that move." He cut me off with a raised hand. "Stick to your route. That's the rule." I wanted to ask what exactly that meant, but before I could, the radios on our belts crackled with static. Davis frowned, adjusting the knob. "Control?" he called. No answer. The static grew louder, a low hiss that made the hair on my arm stand up. It wasn't just noise, it was almost like breathing. Davis swore under his breath and told me to keep working. "Don't follow me," he said, gripping his flashlight. He headed toward the service corridor that ran behind the fashion wing. I watched him go until the shadows swallowed him. The static on my radio cut out. I worked my way through a few storefronts, forcing my brain to focus on the mindless rhythm of cleaning. But after 20 minutes, I realized Davis hadn't come back. I called for him on the radio. Nothing. The unease grew into a knot in my stomach. I told myself he was just doing a sweep. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone wrong. I went to the service corridor. It smelled faintly of floor polish and something else, like heated plastic. His flashlight lay on the ground near the locked boutique, the beam casting a long, pale oval across the tiles. The corridor was empty. I crouched to pick up the flashlight. When I straightened, there was a mannequin standing exactly where Davis had been when I last saw him. Its posture was familiar. Too familiar. I didn't sleep when I got home. My mind replayed the image over and over. The mannequin with Davis's posture, the flashlight abandoned on the floor. By morning, I'd convinced myself I had to talk to someone in charge. Maybe there was an explanation. Security protocol, hidden cameras, something. The mall manager, Mr. Keene, was already in his office when I arrived. His space was too clean, the blinds half closed so the morning light cut into the room in sharp lines. He gestured for me to sit, but his eyes stayed fixed on his computer screen. "Everything all right with your shift?" he asked in a tone that suggested the opposite mattered more. I told him about the mannequins moving, about the store that shouldn't exist, about Davis vanishing without a trace. My voice cracked when I mentioned hearing breathing on the radio. Keene finally looked at me. His face was blank, like I'd just told him the vending machine was out of soda. "This is a large facility," he said smoothly. "At night, shadows play tricks. Fatigue does the rest." "I'm not imagining this," I snapped. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Do you know how many janitors quit in their first week because they get spooked? You'll find Davis tonight. Probably went home early without telling you." I stared at him. He left his flashlight. "Then he'll get another." Keene smiled faintly. It didn't reach his eyes. "I suggest you focus on your work and let security handle security." There was a finality in his tone that told me the conversation was over. As I left, I glanced toward the main floor through his blinds. Down below, in the bright daylight, shoppers milled around. In the window of a clothing store, a mannequin stood in the exact same posture as Davis. The stance, the tilt of the head, the way one hand rested on the hip. I looked back at Keene's office. He was watching me through the glass, his smile gone. That night, I started my shift with my head down, avoiding eye contact with the mannequins in the fashion wing. I told myself I'd stay busy, keep moving, and not let my imagination run wild. My route took me into the children's clothing store. I'd never liked this section. The mannequins here were smaller, child-sized, but their proportions were just slightly wrong. The arms were too thin, the heads too smooth, the torsos stretched unnaturally long under pastel dresses and tiny polo shirts. The overhead lights were dimmer than in other stores, casting soft shadows over rows of racks. As I moved down the central aisle, the air felt close, like it was holding its breath. I started sweeping, keeping my eyes low. Every so often, I glanced at the nearest mannequin just to reassure myself it hadn't moved. Halfway through, I heard a sound, soft plastic tapping against tile. I turned sharply, but nothing was different. The mannequins still stood in their stiff poses, tiny hands at their sides. I resumed sweeping, but my skin prickled. The tapping came again, closer this time. I looked up, and one of the child mannequins was standing in the middle of the aisle. I knew it hadn't been there before. I'd just passed that spot seconds earlier. Its head was tilted upward, as though it was staring at my face despite having no eyes. I took a step back. My heel bumped something. I spun around and nearly tripped over another child mannequin that had been behind me. The tapping became a soft patter now, like many little feet on the tile. I turned wildly, heart pounding. Shapes shifted between the racks, small, pale forms moving just out of view. I dropped the broom and backed toward the door. A faint chorus of plastic joints creaking filled the store. When I finally stumbled into the mall concourse, the tapping stopped. I looked back. All the mannequins were in their original pose, except for one. It stood at the entrance, head tilted, as if watching me leave. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that the child mannequin at the entrance was just coincidence. But the unease stuck with me for the rest of the shift. Around 2 a.m., I was pushing my cart past the electronics store when I felt that same prickling on the back of my neck. I glanced into the glass storefront and froze. There, just inside, was the child mannequin from the kids' clothing section. Same blue sundress, same tilted head. I turned away quickly and kept moving, refusing to look back. But as I rounded the corner toward the home goods store, I saw it again. Standing near a display bed, perfectly still, head tilted as if curious. My mouth went dry. This wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't my mind playing games. It was following me. I began moving faster, trying to stick to the main concourse where the lights were brighter. But each time I passed a store, I'd catch sight of it. Always inside, always in view, always closer than it should have been. When I reached the central fountain, I stopped and scanned the upper level. For a moment, I couldn't see it. Relief washed over me. Then I spotted it. On the balcony above, leaning slightly over the railing, head tilted in that same unnatural angle. I gripped the handle of my cart so tightly my knuckles ached. "You're not real," I muttered under my breath, but my voice didn't sound convincing, even to me. The lights flickered, just once. When they came back, the balcony was empty. I didn't wait to see where it had gone. I pushed my cart toward the maintenance corridor, heart hammering, telling myself I'd just lock myself in the supply room until morning. But when I reached the door, it was already ajar. Inside, standing between the mop sink and the shelves of cleaner, was the mannequin. Still, watching, waiting. The supply room smelled faintly of bleach and mildew. My cart was still in the hall, but my eyes were locked on the figure by the mop sink. It was the same child mannequin, smooth plastic skin, head cocked at that sharp angle. The fluorescent light above flickered once, buzzing faintly. I stepped back into the hallway, pulse thudding in my ears. "Not doing this," I whispered, but my voice trembled. When I looked back inside, the mannequin's head was no longer tilted. It was upright. I hadn't seen it move. My breath caught in my throat. I forced myself to look away, scanning for something, anything to use as a weapon. A metal broom handle leaned in the corner of the hall. I grabbed it, knuckles slick with sweat. I turned back again. The mannequin was 2 feet closer. It wasn't possible. I'd only looked away for a second. My instincts screamed to run, but my legs felt like they had been filled with cement. I shuffled backward as it took another silent step forward. The movement was subtle, joints bending with an unnatural smoothness, but I saw it this time. The light overhead gave a harsh pop and went out, plunging the corridor into semi-darkness, lit only by the emergency exit sign. That's when I heard it. A slow, deliberate scrape of plastic feet against tile. Not a stumble, not an accident. It was approaching me. I turned and bolted, broom handle clattering to the floor. My footsteps echoed wildly as I took a sharp turn into the loading dock. My lungs burned, but I didn't stop until I reached the heavy metal service door. I slammed it shut, heart jackhammering. Through the thin seam where door met frame, I saw movement. A pale plastic hand pressing against the gap, fingers splaying. Then, as if testing me, the hand began to curl and uncurl, slow and deliberate. I stood there, pressed against the cold metal of the service door, watching that pale plastic hand curl and uncurl. It was testing the space, feeling for weakness. I forced myself to back away, my breath shaky. The door had no lock from my side, just a push bar on the other. If it figured out how to work it. The thought cut short when I heard the faint click of the latch shifting. No. I lunged forward, shoving my shoulder against the door just as it began to push inward. The metal vibrated with surprising force, as if something far heavier than a hollow mannequin was on the other side. I leaned my full weight into it, but the pressure only grew. A scraping sound filled the hall, plastic feet dragging against tile, gaining leverage. Then, silence. My pulse pounded in my ears. I waited, counting slow seconds. 1, 2, 3. The door slammed inward. I stumbled back, losing my grip. The gap yawned wide enough for it to slip through. It didn't rush me. It stepped in with slow, measured precision, each movement deliberate, its blank face turned toward me. Behind it, in the doorway, another figure appeared. A taller mannequin, adult-sized, wearing a suit and tie. Its head swiveled toward me in a smooth, inhuman arc. I didn't wait for more. I darted around them, my shoulder brushing cold plastic. The taller one's arm twitched toward me but froze mid-reach, like it was following some rule I didn't understand. I sprinted back into the mall's main concourse, footsteps echoing wildly. The mannequins didn't chase, they just watched, standing in the doorway, perfectly still, as if marking me. But I knew now, they weren't confined to stores. They could follow me anywhere. The food court was dead silent. No whirring fryers, no scent of grease, just the faint hum of the overhead lights. My shoes squeaked faintly against the polished floor as I ducked behind a cluster of plastic tables. I crouched low, forcing myself to breathe quietly. My heart hadn't slowed since the service door incident. My hands were trembling so badly I had to grip the edge of the table to steady them. From my hiding spot, I had a clear view of the concourse. They were still there. The child mannequin in its blue dress stood several yards away, head tilted slightly, not as sharply as before, but enough to look curious. The taller one in the suit lingered just behind, hands at its sides. Neither moved. At first, I thought they were gone statues again, but then I realized they were facing me. Even with all the space between us, their heads were angled perfectly toward my position. I shifted, just enough to hide fully behind the table. My chest tightened. Minutes crawled by. I expected them to advance, to close the gap, but they didn't. They just waited. The longer I stayed crouched there, the more I noticed the faint smell of something like sun-heated plastic drifting closer. The way the air felt heavier, as though the space itself was shrinking. I risked another glance. They were closer. Not much, just a few feet, but I hadn't heard a single step. It was like they were sliding into place when I wasn't looking. I looked away deliberately, counting aloud under my breath. 1, 2, 3. Then I looked again. Closer still. My legs twitched, itching to run, but I knew that the moment I moved, they'd have an excuse to follow. The child mannequin's head straightened slowly, as if deciding something. That's when the lights in the food court went out. All of them. And in the sudden dark, I heard them take a single, synchronized step toward me. The lights butt out with a sharp pop, plunging the food court into blackness so complete it felt physical. I froze, my breath loud in my ears. Then I heard it, plastic feet pounding against tile. Not the slow, deliberate steps I'd seen before. This was fast, desperate. I dropped low and scuttled between the tables, hands grazing sticky surfaces, knees bumping chair legs. The sound grew louder, echoing wildly, coming from multiple directions. They weren't waiting anymore. I groped along the floor until my fingers caught the edge of a counter. I pulled myself behind it, heart hammering. The pounding footsteps stopped. Silence. I strained to hear over the rush of my own breathing. Somewhere in the dark, a joint popped, like plastic being twisted. Then closer, a faint squeak of a hinge. They were moving slowly again, searching. I reached for my phone, fumbling it from my pocket. My thumb hovered over the flashlight icon. If I turned it on, I could see them, but that meant they could see me. The silence deepened, and I realized my mistake. My phone screen was already glowing faintly. A pale plastic face rose into view over the counter. Its smooth features were inches from mine, reflecting the cold light. I recoiled, dropping the phone. It clattered to the floor, spinning, the light flashing across the room in brief bursts. In each flash, I saw them, figures frozen in mid-motion, closer each time. I snatched the phone and bolted. My shoes slipped on the tile as I tore across the court, aiming for the faint glow of an exit sign. Something brushed my shoulder, a cold, hard grip, but I ripped free and stumbled through the doorway, slamming it shut behind me. The pounding footsteps resumed, hitting the door in heavy, rhythmic blows. In the dark hallway beyond, I realized something worse. There had been only 2 mannequins before. Now, there were many more. The door shook violently behind me, each blow rattling the hinges. I staggered back into the narrow hallway, my phone's dim light casting sickly yellow shadows on the cinder block walls. The pounding stopped. Silence swelled, thick and heavy. I didn't trust it. I turned and crept forward, keeping my footsteps soft. The hallway stretched ahead in a long, straight line toward another service door. Halfway there, I heard it. Plastic joints clicking somewhere ahead. I froze. The beam of my phone caught movement at the far end. A mannequin was standing in the center of the hallway, facing me. This one wore a ripped polo shirt and stained khakis, like an abandoned retail worker. Its blank head was tilted down slightly, but I could feel it watching me. I turned to go back the way I came, only to see the suited mannequin from before standing just feet behind me, blocking the exit I'd entered through. I spun again. Now the polo shirt mannequin was closer. The hallway was shrinking. I backed toward a side door, yanking it open. Inside was a small supply closet crammed with shelves of cleaning chemicals and buckets. I slipped in and shut the door, plunging myself into darkness. I pressed my ear to the wood. At first, nothing. Then, soft scraping, like plastic fingernails against the door. More than one set. The scraping moved along the walls, circling the closet, searching for a way in. My pulse pounded in my throat. I gripped a metal mop handle, the only weapon I had, and tried not to breathe. The sound stopped. I waited, every muscle tense. Then something knocked. 3 slow, deliberate raps on the door. I didn't move. Another knock came from behind me. I spun, heart in my mouth, staring at the shelves. Somehow, in the pitch black of the closet, I wasn't alone anymore. The mop handle trembled in my grip. I couldn't see anything, but I felt it. An unmistakable presence just a few feet away, in the cramped dark. The closet was too small for anyone to hide. Shelves pressed against both walls, stacked with bleach bottles and rolls of paper towels. I'd entered alone. So how was there something breathing softly behind me? The sound was wrong. Not quite air, more like a faint hiss, plastic rubbing against plastic. I thumbed my phone screen, flooding the closet with pale light. It was standing between me and the door, a mannequin I hadn't seen before, female form, cracked at the neck, with faint red smears across its blank white face. Its arms hung straight down, but its fingers were curled unnaturally tight, as if it had been gripping something for a very long time. I lifted the mop handle, my voice cracked. Stay away. It didn't move. I edged sideways toward the shelves, eyes locked on it. My phone's light flickered, just for a second. But when it steadied again, the mannequin was closer. Another flicker, closer still. I lunged for the door, shoving past it. The plastic was cold, almost wet, like it had just come from outside in the rain. I burst into the hallway, slamming the closet door shut behind me. But the hallway was no longer empty. They were everywhere, lined along the walls, standing shoulder to shoulder in perfect rows, different shapes, different clothes, all with heads slightly tilted. The air smelled like hot vinyl and dust. None moved. I stepped backward, heart racing. The door behind me clicked open on its own. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. I knew the one from the closet was standing there. And I realized something then. These things didn't care about walking through doors anymore. The mall was theirs. The mannequins stood silent, their smooth faces unreadable, but I could feel their attention pressing on me like heat. There was no way through the hallway without brushing against them, and I couldn't risk turning my back. I needed another way out. Above me, a square vent cover sat loosely in the ceiling. My chest tightened. Claustrophobic spaces weren't my thing, but between the mannequins and the vent, I didn't have a choice. I backed into the corner, yanked a metal step stool from a cleaning station, and climbed up. My hands were slick with sweat as I worked the vent cover free, the screws clinking to the floor. I shoved my phone between my teeth and hoisted myself inside. The duct was narrow, my shoulders brushing both sides. Every move was a loud metallic scrape. The air was stale and tasted of rust. I crawled forward, knees aching against the aluminum, light bouncing ahead in jittery arcs. A sound echoed behind me, a faint clang, like something entering the vent. I froze, listening. Then came the scraping. I twisted to look back. In the weak light, I saw fingers, plastic, white, jointed, curling over the lip of the vent's opening. The mannequin was pulling itself up after me. I scrambled forward, my palms slipping, my heartbeat thundered in my ears. I took a turn blindly, hoping it would lead somewhere, anywhere. But the duct ended abruptly in a mesh grate, bolted from the other side. Through the tiny squares, I could see the dim glow of a service corridor. The scraping was louder now, accompanied by the dull thunk of plastic elbows hitting metal. I kicked at the grate, once, twice, 3 times, until it gave way with a sharp crack. I tumbled out onto the tile, rolling to my feet. The duct behind me was empty. Then I noticed the shadows in the corridor ahead weren't still. They were waiting. The service corridor was dim, lit only by a single buzzing fluorescent tube that flickered like it was struggling to breathe. The shadows along the walls weren't just still, they were posed. Mannequins stood in strange arrangements, like they were mid-conversation. One had its arm raised as if pointing down the hall. Another leaned forward, its head inches from the floor, as though studying a footprint that wasn't there. Every one of them faced the way I'd come. I stepped forward, the sound of my sneakers too loud in the silence. That was when I noticed something worse. The mannequins had positioned themselves along both walls, leaving exactly enough space for me to walk down the middle without touching them, like they wanted me to go that way. I hesitated, but where else could I go? The only other option was a locked steel door behind me. I moved slowly, phone lights swinging from face to face. None blinked, none twitched. But the closer I got to the end of the hall, the more I felt the air shift. Warmer, heavier, like a space that had been closed up too long. The corridor ended at a fork, left toward the loading bay, right toward the main mall concourse. Before I could choose, I heard something. A faint plastic tap, tap, tap coming from the left. I turned toward the sound. At the far end of that hall, a single mannequin waited. It was dressed like a mall security guard, complete with cap and badge. The tap, tap, tap came from its nightstick, knocking slowly against the wall. It tilted its head, and then pointed toward the concourse. They weren't chasing me anymore. They were guiding me. A cold realization settled in my gut. Whatever was happening, I wasn't just trapped in here. I was part of something they'd already planned. The concourse stretched before me like a gutted cathedral, dark storefronts yawning open on either side, skylights above choked with grime, letting in only a sickly green moonlight. But it wasn't the emptiness that stopped me. It was the arrangement. Dozens, maybe hundreds, of mannequins filled the open space, posed in careful, deliberate positions. Some sat at food court tables, plastic hands resting on trays. Others stood in small clusters, their blank faces turned toward one another. A few leaned against railings, looking down toward the lower level. It wasn't random. I knew this layout. The smell of cinnamon pretzels and cleaning solution ghosted into my nose. But it wasn't from here. It was from memory. A memory I'd worked hard to bury. I took a shaky step forward, scanning the crowd. My breath caught when I saw the far end of the concourse. In the exact center of the tiled floor, under the dead clock, stood a mannequin in a dark hoodie and jeans. It was posed with its arms raised, hands open like it was yelling for help. Around it, 4 mannequins pointed accusing fingers. It was my memory. The night my younger brother vanished. We were kids playing hide and seek in a shopping mall not far from here. I'd counted to 20. When I opened my eyes, I saw him, standing just like that, calling for me. People around him pointed, but no one moved to help. And then, nothing. He was gone. I stumbled backward, my knees nearly giving out. The mannequins didn't move, but the positions were too perfect, too precise. They weren't just mocking me. They were showing me something. My phone buzzed in my hand. One new message. No number, no name, just 4 words. Come find him below. I looked toward the nearest escalator. The mannequins were already turning their heads toward it. The escalator sat dead, its black steps locked in place, dust gathering in the grow. Movies. A faint draft drifted upward from the lower level, cool, damp, carrying a faint, coppery tang. I hesitated, glancing at the mannequins. Every single one in the concourse now faced me. Their heads weren't in the same positions as before. They'd tilted forward, ever so slightly, like they were leaning in to watch. I started down. My shoes scraped softly on the unmoving steps, the sound swallowed by the silence. Halfway down, I froze. The mannequins at the bottom were moving. Not shifting when I wasn't looking, moving. Their chests rose and fell in shallow, mechanical breaths. The motion was wrong, too slow, too even, as if it was timed to some invisible metronome. Their shoulders rose with each inhale, plastic creaking faintly in the quiet. I gripped the railing, my heartbeat hammering. The air down here was colder, but each breath I took felt thick like inhaling fog. At the base of the escalator, the mannequins parted in a perfect straight line, revealing a darkened hallway leading into the mall's maintenance sector. No lights, no signage, just a black rectangle of space. From the darkness came a sound, steady, rhythmic, not footsteps, not machinery. Breathing, real breathing. I stepped off the escalator, moving between the mannequin rows. Some had their heads tilted toward me, others stared straight ahead, their blank faces somehow expectant. I swallowed hard and stepped into the dark. My phone's flashlight cut a narrow path through the blackness, revealing rust-stained walls and peeling paint. Pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping occasionally into shallow puddles on the floor. The breathing grew louder. Then, from behind me, I heard another sound. A faint, deliberate exhale. I spun, light slicing through the dark. The mannequins hadn't followed, but one stood in the hallway now, blocking the way back. It wasn't breathing like the others. It was smiling. The smile wasn't painted on. I could see the way the corners of the mannequin's mouth twitched, pulling higher in slow, jerky motions, as if invisible wires were drawing them upward. Its lips, thin and pale, looked softer than they should have been. The grin widened until it stretched too far, too human. I stumbled backward, my shoulder brushing the cold wall. The smell of damp plaster clung to the air, but under it was something else, warm, sour, alive. The mannequin's head tilted, joints clicking faintly. It stepped forward, one careful motion at a time. The sound wasn't the hollow scrape of plastic feet on tile. It was the muffled thud of something heavier. I raised my phone light higher. Its eyes weren't glass anymore. They glistened, wet, focused. The breathing I'd heard before now came from it. Each inhale was ragged, each exhale slow and deliberate. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't listen. The hallway seemed to press in around me, the rusted pipes dripping in an almost rhythmic pattern, like a countdown. The mannequin, no, whatever it was, paused just a few feet away. Its grin twitched wider, teeth showing now, human teeth. Then it whispered. Not a voice exactly, more like the sound of air forcing its way through old vents. He's waiting. My stomach turned ice. I didn't ask who. I knew. It stepped aside, revealing another stretch of hallway behind it. Far at the end, in the glow of a single flickering bulb, a child-sized figure stood motionless. My heart squeezed so hard it hurt. Even from here, I knew the shape, the way the head tilted, the small hands at its sides. It was my brother. The mannequin's grin snapped back to its original plastic-perfect smile in an instant. It raised one arm, palm open, pointing me toward the figure. Somewhere deep in the dark, I thought I heard footsteps retreating. But they didn't sound like a child's. The child-sized silhouette didn't move. It just stood there under the flickering bulb, its head cocked slightly to the side like it was listening for something I couldn't hear. I forced myself to step forward. Each footfall echoed, quick and hollow, bouncing down the narrow hallway. The air grew heavier with every step, thick with the smell of wet concrete and something faintly metallic, like coins held too long in your palm. Behind me, the mannequin still stood where I'd left it, arm extended. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting it to follow, but it didn't. It didn't need to. The walls began to change. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but as I walked, the peeling paint and rusted pipes seemed to inch inward, narrowing the space around me. The corridor that had been 3 feet wide was now barely 2. The overhead pipes groaned, metal expanding like something was crawling through them. I reached out to steady myself, but the wall felt warm, too warm, and soft in places. My fingers came away damp. The figure under the bulb finally moved. A slow, deliberate step backward. "Wait!" My voice cracked in the confined space. It didn't wait. It took another step, disappearing just beyond the edge of the flickering light. I hurried forward, ignoring the claustrophobic squeeze of the hallway. The walls now brushed my shoulders on both sides, the dampness soaking into my shirt. My phone's light caught on movement ahead, a glimpse of bare feet disappearing around a corner. Then I heard it. Not footsteps this time. Breathing. But not like before. This was louder, closer, above me. I froze, craning my head upward. The overhead pipes bulged unnaturally, as if something large was crawling inside, pressing against the metal. The light above me flickered twice, then died. For a heartbeat, everything was pitch black. When the bulb sputtered back to life, the figure ahead was gone, and the walls had closed so tight I could barely breathe. The air was thick enough to taste. A sour, almost sweet staleness clung to the back of my throat, making each breath harder than the last. The walls pressed against my ribs now, the damp concrete seeping cold through my shirt. I couldn't go back. I couldn't go forward without squeezing myself through like a trapped animal. Above me, the pipes groaned again, metal scraping against metal, followed by a wet dragging sound. Whatever was inside was heavy enough to bow the pipe downward. A drop of something warm splashed onto my cheek. I didn't want to know what it was. I pressed my palms against the narrowing walls and forced myself forward. My chest scraped, the dampness smearing against me, and every movement made my breath come faster. The sound above matched my pace. When I sped up, it sped up. When I paused, it paused. My phone light flickered over the wall ahead, barely a gap left. I could see marks in the damp surface, not scratches, not dents, finger grooves. They were fresh. I forced my way forward, the walls now pressing against my hips. My shoulders ached from the pressure. I turned my head sideways just to breathe. A low, gurgling exhale came from above, vibrating through the pipe directly overhead. My pulse slammed against my ears. The last few feet of hallway angled upward, like a burrow leading out. I shoved forward, scraping my elbows raw on the rough surface. The walls were breathing now, expanding and contracting against me. Something in the pipe above began to move faster, scurrying, sliding, almost tearing its way through the metal. My fingertips brushed open space ahead. Air, cooler, cleaner, flowed in from somewhere beyond. I lunged forward, my ribs screaming from the squeeze, and burst out into a wider corridor. I collapsed on my knees, gulping air. The pipe above the hallway bulged one last time before falling still. Somewhere down the new corridor, footsteps echoed. Small, barefoot. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, each slap of bare skin on concrete echoing down the corridor. I wiped the damp from my face and rose to my feet, my phone's beam trembling as I aimed it toward the sound. The corridor stretched ahead, a long ribcage of pipes and steel beams, the shadows shifting as if they were breathing. At the far end, a small figure stood, back to me, head lowered. My stomach knotted. The way the shoulders sloped, the way the hair fell across the neck, it looked exactly like Matthew, my brother. "Matt?" My voice cracked, dry from the crawl. "It's me, don't run." The figure didn't move. I took a step forward, my sneakers squeaking faintly on the damp floor. My light swept over the walls, faded store maps, abandoned maintenance carts, a forgotten mop bucket with water so stagnant it looked like black glass. "Matt, please." It turned. The face wasn't his. It had his eyes, but the rest was wrong. Skin too pale, stretched taut over cheekbones, lips pulled back just enough to reveal teeth that didn't belong in a human mouth. And those eyes, they didn't blink. I froze, every muscle screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't listen. "Why? Are you here?" The voice was his, but layered, like two people speaking at once, one deep and rumbling beneath the other. My throat tightened. I came to. It took a step closer. The sound of its bare feet was wet now, as if they'd been walking through blood. The corridor seemed to contract around us, the walls pressing in with the sound of creaking metal. "Don't follow me again," it whispered, and then it moved. Not a walk, not a run, just a sudden absence where it had been, like it had blinked out of existence. I stumbled forward, my phone light finding only empty space. Somewhere ahead, deeper in the mall, the mannequins began to move again. The echo of my own breath filled the corridor, sharp and ragged. I spun in a slow circle, phone light jerking over the walls, the floor, the pipes above. Nothing, no movement, no sound but the faint hum of electricity somewhere far off. Then, a click. Not a light switch, more like a shoe heel tapping concrete. It came from the left, where a service hallway branched off. My beam caught the corner of a white plastic arm sliding back behind the wall. I froze. Another click came from the opposite side, then another from ahead. When my light swept forward, I saw them. 3 mannequins, side by side, blocking the corridor. They were turned slightly, just enough that their frozen stares seemed to follow me. I took a step back, only to hear another click behind me. I turned. More of them. They were closer than before. The mannequins began to shift, not walking, not twitching, but appearing in new positions when my eyes moved. Each time I blinked, the spacing between us narrowed. They weren't chasing, they were steering. I moved sideways, toward the only open space left, the service hallway where I'd seen the arm. My light caught the edges of more figures deeper inside, their shapes like pale statues waiting in the dark. Every instinct screamed to turn back, but behind me, the mannequins had filled the space completely, their faces inches apart in a seamless wall of plastic and glass eyes. The hallway curved slightly, the air colder here. My footsteps sounded swallowed, like the space itself didn't want echoes. The mannequins followed in silence, always just far enough back to give the illusion of choice. The hall ended in a rusted set of double doors. The paint peeled away in long strips, revealing warped metal beneath. Stenciled letters above the frame spelled Atrium, Level 0 in faded red. A place I didn't know existed. When I pushed the doors, the hinges screamed, and beyond them, dozens of mannequins already stood waiting, arranged in a perfect circle. The only gap in the ring was directly in front of me, and it was closing. The gap in the ring of mannequins narrowed with each blink. I stepped forward, unwilling to turn my back on them, and felt my shoe scuff something hard. Tiles, but not like the mall's floor. These were cracked, black and white squares, alternating in a warped checkerboard pattern. My light swept upward. The atrium wasn't empty. Above me, 3 floors of balconies ringed the space, their railings wrapped in rotting tinsel. Cracked skylights bled faint moonlight down into the center, where the mannequins formed their perfect circle. In the exact middle, on a raised platform of stacked pallets, stood one mannequin unlike the rest. It was dressed in a faded tuxedo jacket, its plastic skin painted with exaggerated stage makeup, white face, red lips, black teardrops under each eye. Its glass eyes caught my light and seemed to gleam. Without warning, a gramophone in the shadows sputtered to life, the needle scratching before a slow waltz began to play, warped, dragging, each note sour with age. The mannequins began to move. Not toward me, not yet. Instead, they turned toward each other, pairs locking hands, their limbs bent in impossible ways, joints popping without sound as they swayed to the music. The tuxedo mannequin raised one stiff arm and pointed at me. Something in the circle shifted. The pairs parted, creating a narrow aisle that led straight to the center platform. My phone buzzed in my hand, an incoming call. No name, no number. When I answered, the voice was my own. "Dance, or they'll take your legs." The music swelled. I backed away, but the aisle began to close, mannequins stepping inward with perfect mechanical grace. Their faces were blank, but somehow expectant. The tuxedo mannequin tilted its head, the sound of creaking plastic echoing through the atrium. I stepped forward, one shaky pace at a time, toward the center. The mannequins froze as I entered the platform's shadow, as if waiting for the first step of the performance. The gramophone clicked, the song looped back to the start, and then the mannequins began to close in again, this time without music. The music cut out so abruptly it left a ringing in my ears. The mannequins kept moving, their steps perfectly synchronized, slow, deliberate, silent. Without the waltz, the rhythm was wrong. Each shift of their weight felt predatory. The tuxedo mannequin remained at the center, its painted mouth stretched in a fixed smile. Its hand, still pointing, now curled inward, beckoning. I backed away, but the mannequins formed a moving wall behind me. They weren't just blocking my path, they were herding me toward the center platform again. Something about their movement made my stomach twist. They weren't shuffling randomly. They were mimicking the steps of a dance, but not one I knew. The pattern was strange, looping back on itself, almost like the steps were designed to trap, not entertain. I stepped sideways, trying to slip between two of them. The instant I did, both mannequins snapped their heads toward me in perfect unison. The click of their neck joints echoed. A cold, rigid hand clamped onto my arm. The touch was wrong, hard and smooth like porcelain, but warm enough to feel alive. My breath caught as another hand gripped my other arm. The mannequins turned me, positioning me between them. Then, they started moving my body. Left step, right step, turn. They forced me into their strange, looping dance. The rest of the mannequins formed a perfect ring, swaying with the rhythm only they could hear. My muscles strained as the plastic fingers dug into my skin, their grip impossible to break. The tuxedo mannequin tilted its head again. Its glass eyes caught the ant light, and for a moment I could swear the pupils moved, watching me. The circle tightened. The dance partners dragged me closer to the center platform step by step until my knees bumped the wooden edge. The tuxedo mannequin reached down with one rigid hand. I didn't want to take it, but the mannequins behind me pressed forward, their chests to my back, their faces hovering inches from my neck. The only way out was forward, and I took its hand. The tuxedo mannequin's hand was ice cold and unyielding, its fingers wrapped around mine with a grip far too strong for something hollow. It stepped back, pulling me up onto the platform. The rest of the mannequins formed a perfect ring around us, motionless now, their glass eyes reflecting the fractured moonlight bleeding through the cracked skylight above. Then the dance began again. But this time, I wasn't being moved by force. The tuxedo mannequin led me with smooth, deliberate steps, each one precise, as if it had practiced for centuries. Its plastic shoes tapped softly against the wood, a sound swallowed instantly by the cavernous atrium. The music returned, not from the gramophone, but from everywhere at once. It was the same warped waltz, but slower, deeper, and layered with faint whispers. The voices weren't speaking English. They weren't speaking anything I recognized. I tried to pull my hand away. The mannequin's grip tightened until I felt the bones in my knuckles grind. It twirled me, and when I came around again, the atrium was gone. The balconies above had transformed into shadowy galleries lined with faceless silhouettes. More mannequins, hundreds of them, watching silently. The checkerboard floor stretched outward infinitely, vanishing into darkness. The tuxedo mannequin's head tilted toward mine. Its painted lips didn't move, but I heard a voice inside my skull. One of us. The mannequins in the galleries began to sway, all in perfect rhythm, as if the entire world was now part of the same dance. My chest tightened. My breath came in shallow, panicked gasps. The tuxedo mannequin leaned closer until its unblinking eyes filled my vision. And then I saw it. Not paint, not glass, but something wet and glistening beneath the thin layer of plastic. The skin was just a shell. The thing inside was alive. The music swelled to a deafening crescendo. The mannequins in the gallery stepped forward, their feet striking the floor in unison. The tuxedo mannequin pulled me closer and whispered, without lips, "Your turn." The tuxedo mannequin's grip didn't loosen. If anything, it grew tighter until my fingertips went numb. I tried to wrench away, but its other hand snapped up, cupping the back of my neck like a dance partner guiding a timid lead. The music slowed. The whispers grew louder, circling my head like a swarm of flies. Words began to take shape, fragmented, broken, but all pulsing with the same meaning. Empty yourself. I looked down. My reflection in the polished platform floor was wrong. My eyes were glassy, my skin pale, my mouth slack. My reflection didn't move with me. It lagged a half-second behind, like it was waiting for something. The mannequin pressed its forehead against mine. My body went rigid. A freezing pressure seeped into my skull, like fingers prying open my mind. In the galleries above, the watching mannequins leaned forward in perfect unison. Their necks creaked, joints popping, as if straining to see. Something was being pulled out of me, not my breath, not my blood, something deeper. My memories flickered in rapid succession, mopping the mall floors, counting coins for the vending machine, my mother's voice calling me in for dinner when I was a kid, each image dimmed, drained, until I could barely remember why they mattered. The tuxedo mannequin's shell rippled. I saw movement underneath, shapes pressing against the plastic from inside, like faces trapped beneath ice. One face pushed forward, stretching the shell thin. It was me. My own face looked back at me from inside its body, eyes wide with terror. The music stopped. The mannequin released me, and I stumbled back, gasping. My reflection on the floor smiled, though I didn't. The mannequins around the ring stepped aside, creating an aisle that led into a darkness I couldn't see through. My reflection stepped forward on its own, peeling itself from the floor like a shadow breaking free. It turned toward the tuxedo mannequin, took its hand, and began to dance. And I realized I was no longer the one in control of my body. I stood there watching myself waltz with the tuxedo mannequin. My body moved with a grace I'd never had, my face fixed in an expression that wasn't mine. I tried to shout, but the sound came out muffled as if I were yelling from underwater. My hands, the hands I now had, were smooth, pale, jointed at sharp angles. My fingers clicked faintly when I curled them. I staggered toward the dance floor, but the mannequins closed ranks. Their faces loomed over me, everyone blank and perfect, yet humming with something alive beneath. They didn't need to touch me to hold me in place. Their presence alone pressed against me like walls closing in. The waltz slowed. My reflection, my stolen body, turned toward me. It tilted its head, lips curling in a polite, almost pitying smile. Then it leaned close to the tuxedo mannequin and whispered something I couldn't hear. The mannequins parted, revealing the darkness beyond the aisle again. I was being herded toward it. My legs, stiff, awkward, unsteady, moved without my consent. Every step echoed too sharply like wood striking marble. The darkness swallowed me. When my eyes adjusted, I saw rows upon rows of mannequins lined up in storage racks. Their shells were thin, almost translucent. Inside each one was someone. Human eyes stared from behind plastic faces. Some wept silently, others mouthed words I couldn't hear. I was lifted by invisible hands and set into an empty shell. The plastic sealed around me like warm wax cooling. My vision narrowed to two perfect glassy eyes. My mouth froze into a neutral smile. Somewhere far away, I heard the mall's night announcement over the speakers. Attention, the mall is now closed. My stolen body, wearing my face, stepped into the light. It looked back once, just once, and then was gone. The tuxedo mannequin returned to the center of the floor, reaching for its next partner. I tried to scream, but mannequins don't have voices. And outside, life in the mall went on.